Hello all, hope we're all doing well. We are continuing with our weekly portion review, and we have concluded the fourth book, the book of Numbers, and we are starting now with the final book of the five books of Moses, with the book of Deuteronomy, or in Hebrew it's Devarim, meaning words or things, and this is also the name of the first portion itself, is the portion of Devarim, of things. And this is discussing how Moses appoints the chieftains of the tribes of Israel, and we have, of course, the 12 spies. We encounter the Edomites and the Ammonites. We have the battles, the conquest of Sichon and Og, and what we were talking about already last week, which is the assignment of the lands to the 2.5 tribes of Reuven, Gad, and Manasseh. Now, we spoke last year. I'll put it in the comments. We spoke last year about the unique relationship with the Ammonites. Today, I want to have a discussion with regards to Edom, right? And the nation of Israel, we needs to ask permission from Edom when we want to pass through its land. But we want to ask why. Why do we need to ask for this permission? And really, this is a result from the journey towards to the land of Israel, right? Which is, I think, pointing on something that's deeper, more than just the geography or even ideas of diplomacy, right? There's really, if we reflect on this, we'll see there's a profound spiritual and historical dynamic between Israel and Edom. I would even say that this dynamic is still playing out today. Now, throughout history, there have been times when the Jewish people have been they needed to step off the world stage, whether this was by choice or by force, right? But these are what we call the times of exile, or galut. And this is times when Israel needs to surrender its political sovereignty. And in doing so, it's also surrendering its influence on global affairs, right? But obviously, the world is not pausing when Israel retreats. So someone actually has to take the reins. And in these moments, this is where Edom or Rome, and even later the Western world, this is where they step forward, right? And Edom, in this sense, represents the political power, right? This is the builder of empires. This is what ultimately brings us in what we call in Rome, Pax Romana, right? The Roman peace. And Edom really organizes the world and brings stability. It's true that it's temporary, but it does bring stability. And assumes really leadership when Israel is absent. But when Israel begins to return from exile, right, when we start rejoining the family of nations, not just physically, but even politically and spiritually, then obviously we need to reckon with Edom. And this re-entering into history and reclaiming a voice on the geopolitical stage, so to speak, really requires navigating the structures that Edom himself built, right? This is why, again and again, every redemptive moment in Jewish history actually begins with asking permission, right? When we want to leave Egypt, Pharaoh needs to give us his consent. When we pass through Edom, as we're discussing right now, messengers have to be sent for their approval. When we leave Persia, right, Cyrus ultimately had to grant us, and he had his famous decree. And even at the end of the exile of Edom, we had to have an approval that needs to come from the rest of the nations. Now, this dynamic really played out in modern times, right? November 29th, 1947, the United Nations, or we'll say the modern day gathering of Edom and the nations, ultimately granted its official recognition of the establishment of the Jewish state. Now, this permission was granted, and once it was, there's not really taking it back at this point. However, it does seem that today the world does seem to second guess its decision, right? So there's from international pressure that deny Israel's legitimacy, and there's also obviously movements that are trying to reverse the clock and even undo the whole miracle of the Jewish return, right? And there's this growing sense that there's this often unspoken, subconscious, but deeply felt feeling that the nations are really regretting saying yes. And this ongoing tension in the Middle East is not simply a dispute over borders or security, right? It's a spiritual and civilizational struggle over the direction of humanity, ultimately, right? The West and Edom is still holding the dominant global narrative. And there's also the Islamic world that is seeking to challenge it. I would specify the Islamic is the not the Islamic the radical Islamic world is really seeking to change it, and Israel, we're caught in the middle, right? And this obviously is really bringing a question: do we have something of our own to say, right? Do we understand that our return to this land wasn't just about surviving, right? It wasn't just about surviving the Holocaust or surviving exile, but it's about bringing a message to the whole world. And this is the true challenge of our generation. Now, the brutal attacks of October 7th really shattered these illusions that we've had. It really exposed the fragility of our security, but also a deeper fragility of our own purpose, right? The failure of the government, the intelligence agencies, and the leadership wasn't just technical. It wasn't a technical error. There was a spiritual vacuum as well. And for too long, we've assumed that being here was just enough, and that our presence in the land is really fulfilling our role. But the nations are asking. You returned after 2,000 years. You shattered the idea of Christian with supersession, and we reopened the pages of the Jewish identity in this sense. And after all that, we still have nothing to say. Right? When Israel fails to lead with a vision, the world around us senses this void and really rushes in to fill it. And it is time for Israel to rise with courage, not just militarily, but morally and spiritually. We need to say we're not merely survivors of tragedy. We're actually bearers of the message of God and humanity, for humanity. And we need to say that our return to the land is not only about borders, but it's about a blessing. And we need to say that when we have something to offer to the world, a vision of justice, of kedusha, of sanctity, of the human soul that is created in God's image, in Hashem's image. If we don't say it, others are ultimately going to speak for us, and they're already doing this, right? We have to have this be a turning point. We can't let October 7th just be as remembered as a time of horror, but as an awakening that we're actually reclaiming our voice. And we're calling to the leaders of the world to rise above the narrow politics and rediscover their prophetic purpose, right? The world doesn't just need a Jewish state. It needs a Jewish message. And we have to be ready to deliver it. And this means us as individuals, as we often talk about, our community, our neighborhood, and ultimately throughout the whole nation. And then eventually throughout the whole world. I'm wishing us all a Shabbat Shalom. Take care.